Game Freak often changes or removes mechanics, whether major ones like Mega Evolution or smaller features like the ability in Generation 5 to register multiple items or access certain menus more easily. Today, the focus is on a mechanic that's been present since the original Red and Blue games, but has been surprisingly inconsistent over time. In every Pokémon game, certain NPCs give out Pokémon, known as gift Pokémon. These are often rare or exclusive, making them worth seeking out. In Red and Blue, if your party is full when you receive one, it still goes to your PC automatically, similar to catching a wild Pokémon with a full team. This quality of life feature means you don't need to visit a Pokémon Center to free up space. However, in Gold and Silver, this feature was removed without explanation, sparking curiosity about which games do or don't allow you to receive a gift Pokémon with a full party. In Ruby and Sapphire, the first gift Pokémon is the Why Not egg in Laveridge, but you can't receive it if your party is full. To check if this was because it's an egg, the cast form at the Weather Institute was tested the same way, but again, a full party blocked the gift. Something about that felt off. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, things got more confusing. When trying to receive the Togepi egg in the Sevi Islands with a full party, the game wouldn't allow it, which was surprising given how closely these remakes stick to the original Gen 1 experience, even blocking evolutions like Golbat to Crobat until the National Pokédex is obtained. Since eggs didn't exist in Gen 1, maybe this was an oversight. To double check, a new file was started and played up to the point where you can receive a Magikarp from a salesman. With a full party, the Magikarp was received and sent to the PC, confirming that non-egg gift Pokémon are treated differently than Egg-san inconsistent and odd design choice. Back in Gen 2, the Togepi egg also can't be received with a full party, continuing the egg-specific limitation. Curious about Emerald, both the Why Not egg and cast form were tested again. While the egg couldn't be received, the cast form could, unlike in Ruby and Sapphire, but similar to Fire Red and Leaf Green. This suggests that third versions of games can handle gift Pokémon differently from their base versions. Yellow behaves the same as Red and Blue, and Crystal works like Gold and Silver. But now, this inconsistency means checking all future third versions for how they handle gift Pokémon. Moving on to Diamond and Pearl, the only non-egg gift Pokémon. Is this conversation helpful so far? A commonly asked question is whether the kid in Salacian Town who gives you seals and ball capsules accepts shiny Unown, or if you need to show him a non-shiny one. The answer is that he does accept shiny Unown. This was a bit surprising, since you'd think that if the Ruin Maniac is particular, the kid might be too, but he isn't. This is likely because the kid requires you to show a specific Pokémon, while the Ruin Maniac doesn't require you to show anything at all. So, the game probably checks the species and form for the kid, but only checks the Pokédex for the Ruin Maniac. I can't say for certain, as I don't know the game's coding, but that explanation makes sense to me. Now for perhaps the most frequently asked question: what's the story behind the Gengar's name? To explain that, some background is needed. While playing Brilliant Diamond, I wanted to catch a Ghastly for my team. I named the first one Rick Ghastly after Rick Astley, but it had a bad nature, so I tried again. The second Ghastly I caught got a slightly more inappropriate name because I was annoyed by my luck, but it also had a bad nature. On the third try, I gave it an even worse name out of frustration, but it finally had a decent nature, so I kept it. That should cover the most commonly asked questions. If there are still questions after watching the video, feel free to ask in the comments. Shiny Pokémon are some of the most prized features in the games. They first appeared in the Space World 97 demo of Gold and Silver, where they were basic and had quirks. There was no animation for shiny encounters, and due to technical constraints, Pokémon with the same color palette when not shiny would also share one when shiny, resulting in less color variety. They were also more common in the demo, with about a 1/977% encounter rate. When the full game launched, these quirks were gone, but shiny Pokémon still had unique aspects. To understand them fully, let's review how shininess is determined. In every mainline game starting from Generation 3, Whether a Pokémon is shiny depends on its personality value combined with your trainer ID and secret ID. In Generation 2 though, it was based on IVs. Defense, Special, and Speed 4s had to be 10, and the Attack 4 needed to be 2, 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 14, or 15. Since Gen 2 4s range from 0 to 15, this gave shiny odds of 1 in 8,192, which remained the standard until X and Y lowered it to 1 in 4,096. Game Freak likely wanted players to notice shiny Pokémon in Gen 2, which is why there's a guaranteed shiny Gyarados in the main story. The only other mainline games with guaranteed shiny Pokémon are Black and White 2, which feature multiple. In Crystal, players can receive the Odd Egg, which lives up to its name. The Odd Egg can hatch into one of 7 baby Pokémon, and there's no way to tell which until it hatches. Additionally, it has a 50% chance of being shiny, making it the highest shiny chance in any game, but only in the Japanese version. Bulbapedia notes that this 50% claim needs a citation, so it's not fully confirmed. To make things more confusing, the method of obtaining the Odd Egg in the Japanese version of Crystal differs from the international version. A common question is whether the kid in Salacian Town who gives seals and ball capsules accepts shiny Unown, or if you need to show him a regular one. The answer is, he does accept shiny Unown. This was a bit surprising because you'd think if the Ruin Maniac is picky, the kid would be too, but he's not. It's likely because the kid requires you to show a specific Pokémon, so the game probably checks the species and form, while the Ruin Maniac only checks the Pokédex. I can't confirm this for sure since I don't know the game's code, but it seems logical. Now, about the most important question, what's the deal with the name of that Gengar? To understand it, some context is needed. While playing Brilliant Diamond, there was an attempt to catch a Ghastly for the team. The first one caught was named Rick Ghastly, as a play on the name Rick Astley, but it had a bad nature. The second Ghastly caught, named with a slightly more crude joke due to frustration with the random nature results, also had a bad nature. The third Ghastly, named with an even cruder joke, finally had a decent nature, so it was kept. Shiny Pokémon are highly prized in the series. They first appeared in the Space World 97 demo of Gold and Silver, where they were simplified and had some quirks. For example, there was no animation for encountering one, and due to hardware limitations, shiny palettes were less varied. Shiny Pokémon were also more common in that demo, with about a 977% encounter rate. In the final game, those quirks were gone, but shiny Pokémon still had some odd traits. To understand them better, some basics need to be covered. From Generation 3 onward, whether a Pokémon is shiny depends on its personality value and the trainer's ID and secret ID. In Generation 2, however, a Pokémon's shininess is based on its IVs. Defense, Special, and Speed must be 10, and Attack must be 2, 3, 6, 7, 10, 11, 14, or 15. Since 4s range from 0 to 15, this results in a shiny chance of 1 in 8,192, which remained until Generation 6, where it was increased to 1 in 4,096. Shiny Pokémon were new in Gen 2, so it seems the developers wanted players to be aware of them, hence the guaranteed shiny Gyarados encounter. The only other mainline game with guaranteed shiny Pokémon is Black and White 2, which features several. In Pokémon Crystal, there's also the Odd Egg, which stands out. It contains one of 7 baby Pokémon and has a 50% chance of being Shinya, at least in the Japanese version. There's uncertainty about this, as the 50% figure lacks a citation, and obtaining the Odd Egg differs between the Japanese and international versions. Is this conversation helpful so far? In the Japanese version, players needed the mobile Game Boy adapter, which connected the Game Boy Color to a mobile phone to access the Mobile System G-Ban early form of online connectivity for the Pokémon series. One feature was an online event that allowed players to receive an egg ticket from the daycare man. This ticket could be given to the nurse at the Pokémon Communication Center in Goldenrod City to obtain the Odd Egg. Since the mobile Game Boy adapter was only available in Japan, players in other countries couldn't access this system. However, the international versions of Pokémon Crystal changed this by allowing players to receive the odd egg directly from the daycare man, without needing the egg ticket. This is possibly the only case where an event-exclusive feature in Japan was made directly available in the international release. In the international versions, the odd egg has a 14% chance of containing a shiny Pokémon, compared to the reported 50% in the Japanese version. The likelihood of each Pokémon appearing from the egg varies, with Cleffa and Igglybuff being the most common shiny outcomes, and Pichu and Tyrogue the rarest. Breeding for shiny Pokémon in Generation 2 isn't straightforward. Unlike later generations where breeding shinies is always a possibility given enough time, in Gen 2, a Pokémon's fours directly determine whether it can be shiny. Most parent combinations can never produce a shiny offspring, no matter how many eggs are hatched. When two Pokémon breed in the daycare, the offspring stats are generated through specific steps. A random attack 4 is chosen first, which determines the gender. Then, the defense and special IVs are inherited from the parent of the opposite gender. The special stat has a 50% chance of being inherited directly or modified by 8 points, depending on whether it's above or below a certain value. For example, if a Lake of Rage Gyarados is bred with a female Dragonite, and the resulting Dratini is female, it would inherit Gyarados' defense stat and a possibly modified special stat. Finally, a completely random speed stat is generated, calculating the odds. A male Dratini can't be shiny in this setup due to incompatible force, so, after passing a 50% gender roll, there's a 50/50th chance to get one of the 8 attack IVs that allow shininess, a 50% chance to inherit or modify the special stat correctly, and a 1 in 6 chance to roll a speed IV of 10. This results in a 1 in 128 chance to hatch a Shinya relatively good rate compared to the 1 in 819 odds seen in Generation 3 games. While complex, this Gen 2 system raises the question, why not just breed 2 shiny Pokémon for better odds? Try it and see what happens. In Generation 2 of Pokémon, a Pokémon may stare at you intensely, full of energy, but still fail to produce an egg. This is because the game doesn't allow breeding between Pokémon that are considered related, due to their matching defense and special stat traits that shiny Pokémon always share. If 2 Pokémon have matching defense and special stats, even if the special stat differs by 8, the game assumes they're related, preventing breeding. However, there are still 2 methods to reduce shiny odds to 1 in 64. If you breed a female Pokémon with a 100% female gender ratio with a shiny male, you don't have to worry about gender roles. The same applies when using a 100% male Pokémon with a shiny female. Additionally, using a Ditto works, since the baby always inherits Ditto's stats regardless of gender. Shiny hunters refer to Dittos, used in this method as shiny 4 Dittos. Since attack and speed stats aren't inherited, a Ditto with 10 in defense and 2 or 10 in special will produce a shiny at a rate of 1 in 64 per egg. Even in their first appearance, shiny Pokémon had unique mechanics for creating whole teams of different colored creatures. Many shiny Pokémon have changed their appearance between generations 2 and 3. For example, some shinies in Gen 2 later became the regular color scheme in Gen 3, while others had drastically different shiny designs. Electabuzz's shiny form changed significantly, and Machop's Gen 2 shiny is no longer seen after that generation. Gen 3 shiny Machop looks more like Gen 2's regular version. Machoke and Machamp also had changes to both regular and shiny forms across generations, with clearer differences becoming more visible in Gen 4. While Gen 2 has the most changes to shiny colors, it's not the only generation to feature such shifts. Pokémon like Pidgeot also experienced noticeable changes, though some alterations may be due to color palette limitations in Gen 2. For example, Blastoise's shell and body shared the same color in Gen 2, but by Gen 3, they were differentiated in both shiny and regular versions. The Cyndaquil line shows a clear example of palette restrictions. In Gen 2, each Pokémon is limited to 4 colors: white, black, and 2 others. For Cyndaquil, those 2 extra colors are used for its flames, forcing the back to be black with orange highlights. As a result, the shiny version only changes flame and back colors. Gen 3 allows for a more refined blue back and separates changes between the body and flames, which wasn't possible before. Finally, the Pokémon Unknown stands out in Gen 2 for having 26 forms, each representing a letter of the Latin alphabet. In that generation only, Unknown's form is determined by its IVs, the same values that determine shininess. Because of this, only certain Unknown forms can actually appear as shiny. Those specific forms remain unknown. Is this conversation helpful so far? In Generation 2 of Pokémon, only Pokémon with certain individual values 4s can be shiny, and this is purely coincidental since IV is a fan-made term. However, it's interesting that IVs impact several traits in Gen 2, including gender. For example, starter Pokémon have a 7-to-1 male-to-female ratio, meaning it's much more common to get a male. If you do manage to get a female starter, it can only have an attack 4 of 0 or 1, which limits its attack stat. Because shiny Pokémon require an attack 4 of at least 2, Pokémon with a 7-to-1 gender ratio can only be shiny if they are male. So, it's not possible for these specific Pokémon to be both female and shiny. The group of Pokémon with this gender ratio is relatively small, mainly including starters and fossil Pokémon. The only exceptions in Gen 2 are Togepi and Snorlax. This mechanic no longer applies in later generations, as IVs no longer determine shininess or gender. There are also some glitches related to shiny Pokémon, such as one that turns Wild Ditto into Shiny Ditto, but the focus here is on intended mechanics. The older Pokémon games have many interesting quirks due to technical limitations, and even something like shiny Pokémon had many aspects that changed quickly. Pokémon Colosseum is a unique entry in the series, with RPG gameplay similar to the main games but without a Pokédex or gym badges, and it's a home console title. It was developed by Genius Sonority, and, notably, the lead programmer had never played a Pokémon game, and the team lacked Pokémon experts. This might explain the glitch discussed here. Before getting into the glitch, it's important to understand how the poison status works outside of battle in earlier generations. Before Gen 5, a poisoned Pokémon would take damage as you walk. Before Gen 4, if a poisoned Pokémon's HP reached 0 while walking, it would faint, requiring healing at a Pokémon Center or an item like a revive. From Gen 4 onward, poison would stop affecting a Pokémon once it hit 1 horsepower in the overworld, and in Gen 5, poison damage outside of battle was removed entirely. In Pokémon Colosseum, a Gen 3 game, poisoned Pokémon take damage as you walk, and they can faint from it. When this happens, you can use a revive, or head to a healing machine. Using a revive brings the Pokémon back with half its HP, but in Colosseum, they might still be poisoned afterward, which shouldn't happen. Revives are supposed to clear all status conditions. To investigate, poisoned Pokémon were tested under different conditions. When fainted from poison during battle, or fainted while poisoned from an attack in battle, using a revive removed the poison. The same result occurred when using a revive outside of battle after fainting in those ways, but if a Pokémon faints due to poison damage while walking in the overworld, using a revive does not remove the poison. This appears to be a unique glitch specific to that situation in Pokémon Colosseum. This is a different kind of status condition than paralysis or poison, and the code for Cute Charm functions a bit differently. Another interesting finding, though it might not seem related at first, is that abilities like Static don't check if the opponent already has a status condition. Of course, a Pokémon can't have more than one major status condition at a time, nor can it be inflicted with the same one twice. So, if Static or Poison Point activates while the opponent is already afflicted, the ability still triggers, but it doesn't actually do anything. However, the fact that it still activates is important. To understand why, we need to revisit a certain set of tasks. In over 10,000 trials, it was observed that when Static triggered on the first hit of Double Kick, Pikachu only became paralyzed about a third of the time, compared to when it triggered on the second hit. That's odd. Why would it matter which hit activates Static? To explain this, we need to look into how the game checks for secondary effects. For most moves, the game checks for a move's secondary effect before checking if an ability like static activates if the move makes contact. For instance, if you use Thunder Punch and pass the paralysis check, and then static activates, the paralysis from the move comes first, followed by any ability effect. But with multi-hit moves like Double Kick, the sequence is reversed. Any secondary effect from the move happens after the ability activates. Normally this doesn't matter, because in Gen 3, the only multi-hit move with a secondary effect is Twin Needle, which doesn't make contact. But here, this order becomes very significant. So why did static triggering on the first hit of Double Kick result in paralysis only a third of the time? It has to do with how static and similar abilities work in Gen 3. Instead of directly causing a status effect, they temporarily add a secondary effect to the move making, capable of causing paralysis, burn, etc. This added effect is supposed to disappear by the next attack, but since multi-hit moves apply secondary effects after the ability activates, the move gains the new effect only for the current hit. So, if static activates on the first hit, the second hit of Double Kick doesn't get the chance to paralyze unless static activates again. But there's another catch. Multi-hit moves like Double Kick are coded to have a 0% chance of a secondary effect. So even if Double Kick gains a status effect from static, it technically can't apply it, right? Well, in Ruby, Sapphire, Fire Red, and Leaf Green, there's a coding error. The game pulls a random number from 0 to 99 and checks if it's less than the chance of a secondary effect happening. What it was supposed to do, and what Emerald does correctly, is activate the effect only if the number is less than the chance. But in the other games, it activates if the number is less than or equal to the chance. That means a 0% chance can still activate if the number pulled is 0. Now, normally moves with a 0% chance don't have any secondary effects at all, but multi-hit moves can temporarily gain one from abilities like Static or Poison Point, so that 0% effectively becomes a 1% chance. Still, that doesn't fully explain why the results varied based on which hit of Double Kick activated Static. But now we know. When Static activates on the first hit, the second hit has a chance, albeit a very small one, to inflict paralysis. This is a different type of status condition than paralysis or poison, and the coding behind Cute Charm is a bit different. An interesting, initially unrelated finding is that abilities like Static don't check whether the opponent already has a status condition. Normally, a Pokémon can't be affected by more than one status condition at a time, and it can't be affected by the same one twice. So if abilities like Static or Poison Point activate while the target already has a status condition, nothing happens. The ability still activates, but the game has something in place that prevents it from doing anything. However, the fact that it still activates is important. To understand why, we need to revisit the unopened closures experiments. They observed something odd in over 10,000 trials. When Static activated on the first hit of Double Kick, Pikachu only became paralyzed about a third as often as when Static triggered on the second hit. That seems strange. Why would it matter which hit activates Static? To understand this, we need to look at the game's code and see when it checks for secondary effects. For most moves, the game checks for secondary effects before checking if abilities like Static activate, assuming the move makes contact. So, if a move like Thunder Punch paralyzes and Flame Body activates, the paralysis occurs first, then the attacker gets burned. But with multi-hit moves like Double Kick, the check order is reversed. The opponent's ability activates first, then the game checks for any secondary effects. In Generation 3, the only multi-hit move with a built-in secondary effect is Twin Needle, which doesn't make contact, so this usually doesn't matter. But in this case, the order becomes important. Back to the original question, why did Pikachu become paralyzed far less often when Static activated on the first hit of Double Kick? This ties in to how Static and similar abilities work in Generation 3. Instead of directly causing paralysis or other effects, these abilities temporarily give the attacking move a secondary effect that can cause status conditions. This effect should disappear before the next attack, but because multi-hit move secondary effects activate after the opponent's ability, double kick can gain a temporary secondary effect like paralysis if static triggers. So, if static activates on the first hit, double kick gains the ability to paralyze but only for that hit. The second hit won't paralyze unless static activates again. For most moves, the game checks for a move's secondary effect before checking if an ability like static activates if the move makes contact. For instance, if you use Thunder Punch and pass the paralysis check, and then static activates, the paralysis from the move comes first, followed by any ability effect. But with multi-hit moves like double kick, the sequence is reversed. Any secondary effect from the move happens after the ability activates. Normally this doesn't matter, because in Gen 3, the only multi-hit move with a secondary effect is Twin Needle, which doesn't make contact. But here, this order becomes very significant. So why did static triggering on the first hit of double kick result in paralysis only a third of the time? It has to do with how static and similar abilities work in Gen 3. Instead of directly causing a status effect, they temporarily add a secondary effect to the move, making it capable of causing paralysis, burn, etc. This added effect is supposed to disappear by the next attack, but since multi-hit moves apply secondary effects after the ability activates, the move gains the new effect only for the current hit. So, if static activates on the first hit, the second hit of double kick doesn't get the chance to paralyze unless static activates again. But there's another catch. Multi-hit moves like double kick are coded to have a 0% chance of a secondary effect. So even if double kick gains a status effect from static, it technically can't apply it, right? Well, in Ruby, Sapphire, Fire Red, and Leaf Green, there's a coding error. The game pulls a random number from 0 to 99 and checks if it's less than the chance of a secondary effect happening. What it was supposed to do, and what Emerald does correctly, is activate the effect only if the number is less than the chance. But in the other games, it activates if the number is less than or equal to the chance. That means a 0% chance can still activate if the number pulled is 0. Now, normally moves with a 0% chance don't have any secondary effects at all, but multi-hit moves can temporarily gain one from abilities like static or poison point. So, that 0% effectively becomes a 1% chance. Still, that doesn't fully explain why the results varied based on which hit of double kick activated static. But now we know, when static activates on the first hit, the second hit has a chance, albeit a very small one, to inflict paralysis. This is a different type of status condition than paralysis or poison, and the coding behind Q-Charm is a bit different. An interesting, initially unrelated finding is that abilities like static don't check whether the opponent already has a status condition. Normally, a Pokémon can't be affected by more than one status condition at a time, and it can't be affected by the same one twice. So if abilities like static or poison point activate while the target already has a status condition, nothing happens. The ability still activates, but the game has something in place that prevents it from doing anything. However, the fact that it still activates is important. To understand why, we need to revisit the unopened closures experiments. They observed something odd in over 10,000 trials. When static activated on the first hit of double kick, Pikachu only became paralyzed about a third, as often as when static triggered on the second hit. That seems strange. Why would it matter which hit activates static? To understand this, we need to look at the game's code and see when it checks for secondary effects. For most moves, the game checks for secondary effects before checking if abilities like static activate, assuming the move makes contact. So, if a move like Thunder Punch paralyzes and Flame Body activates, the paralysis occurs first, then the attacker gets burned. But with multi-hit moves like Double Kick, the check order is reversed. The opponent's ability activates first, then the game checks for any secondary effects. In Generation 3, the only multi-hit move with a built-in secondary effect is Twin Needle, which doesn't make contact, so this usually doesn't matter. But in this case, the order becomes important. Back to the original question, why did Pikachu become paralyzed far less often when static activated on the first hit of Double Kick? This ties into how static and similar abilities work in Generation 3. Instead of directly causing paralysis or other effects, These abilities temporarily give the attacking move a secondary effect that can cause status conditions. This effect should disappear before the next attack, but because multi-hit move secondary effects activate after the opponent's ability, double kick can gain a temporary secondary effect like paralysis if static triggers. So, if static activates on the first hit, double kick gains the ability to paralyze but only for that hit. The second hit won't paralyze unless static activates again. This felt off. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, the situation became even more confusing. A test with the Togepi egg in the CV Islands showed it couldn't be received with a full party. This was odd, because these games aim to replicate Gen 1 as closely as possible, to the extent of blocking certain evolutions until you get the National Pokédex. Eggs didn't exist in the original games, so this might be why it was changed. Perhaps it was just an oversight. To double check, a new file was started and progressed to the Magikarp salesman. With a full party, the Magikarp was received and sent to the PC, showing that non-egg gifts are handled differently than egg gifts in at least this game. Because of this, it became clear that other games might handle things differently too. In Gen 2, the Togepi egg was also tested, and unsurprisingly, couldn't be received with a full party. Back in Ruby and Sapphire, something felt off, so Emerald was checked. The Wynor egg still couldn't be received with a full party, but Castform could, unlike in Ruby and Sapphire. This matched how Fire Red and Leaf Green handled things, establishing that third versions may treat gift Pokémon differently from the original paired games. Yellow behaves the same as Red and Blue, and Crystal matches Gold and Silver. With this discovery, checking all the third versions for these mechanics became necessary. Moving forward, the examination continues with Diamond and Pearl and their non-egg gift Pokémon. Game Freak has a history of either removing or changing mechanics, ranging from major changes like getting rid of Mega Evolution to smaller adjustments like Gen 5, allowing multiple registered items. Today, the focus is on a mechanic that's existed since the original Red and Blue games, but whose specific implementation has been surprisingly inconsistent across the series. In every Pokémon game, there are certain non-playable characters who give you a Pokémon as a gift. These so-called gift Pokémon can sometimes be hard or even impossible to get elsewhere in that game, making them worth tracking down. In Red and Blue, if your party is full when you receive one, it still gets sent to your PC automatically, just like catching a wild Pokémon with a full party. This was a helpful feature because it saved players a trip to the Pokémon Center to make room. When Gold and Silver were released, however, this convenience was removed. You couldn't receive a gift Pokémon if your party was full. It wasn't a huge issue, but it was strange that the feature was dropped for no clear reason. That led to the question, which games let you receive a gift Pokémon even with a full party? The answer is more complicated than expected. After looking at the first two generations, attention turned to Ruby and Sapphire. The first gift Pokémon in those games is the Why Not egg in Laveridge. Trying to receive it with a full party doesn't work. To see if it was just an issue with eggs, the Castform gift at the Weather Institute was tested, and it also required an open party slot. This felt off. Then came Fire Red and Leaf Green, which aimed to replicate Gen 1 mechanics within the Gen 3 framework. In Leaf Green, the Togepi egg couldn't be received with a full party, which seems strange since gift Pokémon could be accepted in Gen 1 even with a full party. But eggs didn't exist in Gen 1, so maybe that's why. To be sure, a new file was started to test the Magikarp gift from the Pokémon Center salesman. With a full party, it was still given and sent to the PC. This confirmed that in these games, eggs and non-egg gift Pokémon are handled differently, which is confusing but also suggests other games might handle it differently too. In Gen 2, the Togepi egg is a gift, so the same check was done, and as expected, you can't receive it with a full party. Returning to Ruby and Sapphire, something still didn't feel right. So the same test was done in Emerald. The Wynor egg couldn't be received with a full party, but the Castform could, unlike in Ruby and Sapphire, but similar to Fire Red and Leaf Green. This shows that the third game in a generation might have different rules from the first two. For reference, Yellow works like Red and Blue, and Crystal matches Gold and Silver, but going forward, Each third version now needs to be checked individually. The next test would be Diamond and Pearl, focusing on their non-egg gift Pokémon. In the game, the EV given after the post-game can't be received. If your party is full, the giver will say she can't give it to you. This is unusual, as earlier games like Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald allowed you to receive it regardless. Similarly, in Hearthome, a hiker offers a Happiny egg, but again, you can't get it if your party is full. Platinum, like Diamond and Pearl, doesn't let you receive any gifts with a full party. Heart Gold and Soul Silver follow the same rules as Gold, Silver, and Crystalno gift Pokémon if your party is full. It gets more frustrating if you enter a password to get an egg from Primo and your party is full. You'll have to re-enter the password to try again. In Black and White, the egg west of Route 1 can't be picked up with a full party, and the same rule applies to other gift Pokémon. Black 2 and White 2 follow this pattern. In X and Y, things change. After beating Professor Sycamore, you're offered a Kanto starter, and if your party is full, you must send one Pokémon to the box to accept it. When reviving fossils, they're also sent to your PC. If there's no space, this feature returns for the first time since Emerald. No gift eggs are given in X and Y, but daycare eggs still can't be received with a full party. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire revert to needing an empty slot to receive a gift Pokémon, similar to the original games. However, when you get Latias or Latios after the 5th gym, you're prompted to send a Pokémon to the box, much like the Kanto starters in X and Y. Interestingly, if you try to revive a fossil in Omega Ruby with a full party, the Pokémon goes straight to your PC, which differs from how other gift Pokémon are handled, and from how fossils worked in the original versions. In Generations 1-5, fossils followed the same rules as other gift Pokémon. In Generation 6, things are inconsistent. The Kanto starter and Lucario prompt you to send a Pokémon to the box, while Lapras can't be obtained with a full party. This suggests a lack of standardization, while the behavior in later games like the Switch titles and Generation 7 seems to be more consistent. Generation 6 appears to be the exception when it comes to fossil behavior. Do you like this personality? You use Poké coupons, but you're not charged until you actually teach Mew a move. You can answer the tutor's questions as many times as you want without being charged. In that video, it was mentioned that no one knew the exact mechanics of the tutor, only the basics, like what was just explained. That makes sense, considering you need specific requirements just to access this tutor. The tutor doesn't even appear in the Mount Battle lobby unless you have Mew in your party. However, after some research, the full details of how the Mew tutor works are now known and are explained in this video. It can get a bit complex, so if you want a short summary, skip to the on-screen timestamp. There's also a Google Doc with all the information linked in the description and pinned comment. First, there are 100 moves Mew can learn from this tutor. These include 6 exclusive ones: Feint Attack, Fake Out, Hypnosis, Nightshade, Roleplay, and Zap Cannon. If you consider the Virtual Console versions of the Gen 2 games and Mew from My Pokémon Ranch, all of these except Feint Attack and Fake Out have been teachable to Mew since Pokémon XD. The remaining 94 moves come from TMs, HMs, other tutors in Gen 3, including XD exclusive ones like Self-Destruct, and Mew's level up moves. Yes, this tutor can even offer to teach Mew Pound. But not just any combination of these moves is possible. Only one of the 6 exclusive moves can be taught to Mew at a time, so a Mew with both Feint Attack and Fake Out is impossible. Also, some move combinations seem to appear more often than others. This was discovered through testing and online research. More information was provided through a Pokémon ROM hacking server, which greatly sped up the process. The tutor uses 36 templates grouped into categories: Combo, Risky, Reliable, Offensive, Defensive, and Random. The only template in the Random category chooses any 4 moves from the pool, excluding the 6 exclusives. Other templates select combinations like 4 offensive moves or 4 punch-based moves. The remaining 33 templates always include at least one specific move, with some having slight variations. For example, Feint Attack appears in 3 templates and is always paired with another move that has 60 power and bypasses evasion. Zap Cannon appears in 5 templates, usually with other high power, low accuracy moves. Which template you get isn't entirely random, it's influenced by your answers. Although it might feel random, unless you get one of the 3 random-oriented templates, your answers do affect the outcome. At the start of the quiz, 4 parameters are set to 0, 3 of them referred to as attack, strategy, and risk. The 4th is called seed, which will be explained later. As you answer the first 4 questions, the selected answers change the values of attack, strategy, and/or risk. The options you're given are also random, and some answers alter the parameters by random amounts, making it hard to aim for a specific template. Question 5 is more complicated. It may influence the parameters but doesn't seem to affect the final result significantly, making it more like filler. The moves Mew will be offered depend on the final values of attack, strategy, and risk. Once you finish answering the questions, the game uses your responses to determine a category, then a subcategory if necessary, and finally a template. For example, if strategy and risk have the same highest points and both are above attack, a defensive template is chosen. Within the defensive category, there's a 70% chance of selecting a template from the first subcategory and a 30% chance of getting the one template in the second subcategory, the one that gives Mew the move Fake Out. Each template within a chosen category or subcategory has an equal chance of being picked. For instance, if the reliable category is selected, each template has a 25% chance of being chosen. If the second subcategory of the risky category is picked, there's a 50% chance for either of the 2 templates in it to be selected. Now, for how the non-fixed move slots are determined, 2 factors influence this. One is the seed parameter, which functions like a random number generator. It's not something easily manipulated, so it's not a major focus. The more significant factor is the label saw flags next to the fixed moves, such as consistent or offensive. These flags are assigned to the 94 non-exclusive moves the tutor can offer Mew. Once a template is selected, the game pulls the correct number of moves with the appropriate flag from this list. For example, if you get a template with feint attack in the first slot, the 3rd and 4th slots will be filled with moves labeled as consistent. The flags work as follows. Physical indicates physical attacks, special covers special attacks, and defensive includes both physical and special types. Note that the offensive flag is different from the offensive category. The consistent flag includes moves with 100% accuracy or that bypass evasion without any drawbacks like recoil or stat reduction. Inconsistent is the opposite moves with less than perfect accuracy or some downside. It also includes situational moves like Mimic, Roar, and Transform, as well as return and frustration moves whose power varies, making them inconsistent despite being accurate and drawback free. Technically, inconsistent isn't a flag, it's the absence of the consistent flag, meaning any move without consistent is considered inconsistent. The punch flag applies to moves with punch in their name, like Fire Punch, Dynamic Punch, and Mega Punch. A complete list of which moves have which flags is available in a links document. If a move has no flag, it only appears in templates that allow for inconsistent moves, or templates that accept any move. In summary, your answers to the tutor's questions are just 3 value scores. Based on these, a template is chosen, which dictates which of the exclusive moves the tutor might offer, sometimes all, some, or none. The remaining move slots, if any, are filled with moves Mew can learn in Generation 3 via TMs, HMs, other tutors, or leveling up, based on specific criteria. The tutor can offer 6 exclusive moves to Mew, but only 1 can be on its moveset at a time. Later games have made some of these moves, like Roleplay and Nightshade, more accessible. While this explanation is based on testing that aligns with others' findings, the underlying code is complex, so there could be errors or missing details. Any new information discovered will be added to the document linked below. Pokémon XD was released in 2005, and only now, 19 years later, has the Mew tutor's mechanics finally been understood. Researching and reviewing this data was both fun and fascinating. After answering a series of questions, the game uses the results to assign points to different parameters. Based on these points, it selects a category, potentially a subcategory, and then a template. For instance, if the strategy and risk categories have equal high scores, a template from the defensive category is chosen. Within the defensive category, there's a 70% chance the template will be from the first subcategory and a 30% chance it will be from the second subcategory, which includes a template giving Mew the move Fake Out. Each template within a category or subcategory has an equal chance of being chosen. For example, in the reliable category, each template has a 25% chance, while in the second subcategory of the risky category, each has a 50% chance. To determine the non-fixed move slots, two main factors are used. One is a parameter called seed, which functions similarly to a random number generator. Although it influences move selection, it cannot be controlled, so it's not heavily emphasized. The second, and more important factor, is the set of labels called flags attached to the fixed moves, such as consistent or offensive. These flags help determine which of the 94 non-exclusive moves Mew can learn are eligible for the remaining slots. If a template has a move like Feint Attack in slot 1, then slots 3 and 4 must be filled with moves labeled with the consistent flag. Flags are grouped logically: physical for physical attacks, special for special attacks, and offensive includes any move marked physical or special. However, offensive as a flag is different from the offensive category. Consistent moves typically have perfect accuracy, ignore evasion, and lack drawbacks such as recoil or stat reductions. On the other hand, inconsistent includes moves with less than 100% accuracy, drawbacks, or variable effectiveness, like Mimic, Roar, Transform, Return, and Frustration. Notably, inconsistent isn't a distinct flag, it's simply the absence of the consistent flag. Moves without any flags only appear in templates requiring inconsistent moves, or in those that accept any move. The punch flag includes any move with punch in its name, such as Fire Punch, Dynamic Punch, or Mega Punch. A complete list of which moves have which flags is available in a linked document. Once a template is chosen, it determines some or all of the tutor's offered moves. Any remaining moves are selected from Mew's legal moves in Generation 3, including TMs, HMs, move tutors, and level up moves, depending on specific properties. The tutor can teach Mew 6 exclusive moves, though only one can be used at a time. Some of these exclusive moves, like Roleplay and Nightshade, have become easier to obtain in later games. Although testing aligns with reported findings, the underlying code is complex and may contain overlooked details. Any new discoveries will be added to the linked document. After nearly 2 decades since Pokémon XD's release in 2005, the mechanics behind the Mew tutor have finally been understood. Thanks to the research they conducted and a video by a collector showcasing the Mew tutor, I was able to get a bit of a head start before contacting Stars. I hope I explained everything clearly, but if you have any questions about the topics discussed, feel free to leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks for watching, and a big thank you to those supporting through Patreon, shown on screen. See you next time.